Students, in the beginning of this supplementary reader, I gave you the gist, the summary. I narrated the summary in Tamil. Next, we watched the video of the short story. Now, let us go for the explanation of the short story. Unit 1, Supplementary. After 20 years, O. Henry. Here is a story entitled After 20 Years, which is about two best friends who had to part ways. They returned to keep an appointment they had made 20 years ago. Read to find out what happens when they meet again. அதாவது இந்த கதையினுடைய சுருக்கத்தை அப்படியே ஒரே ஒரு சென்டென்ஸில் தெளிவாக சொல்லிட்டாங்க. அதாவது இந்த ஸ்டோரி எதை பற்றினா டூ பெஸ்ட் ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸை பற்றி அப்படின்ட்டு 20 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி ஒரு அப்பாயின்மெண்ட் வாங்கினாங்க. அந்த அப்பாயின்மெண்ட்டுக்கு 20 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி மீண்டும் அதே இடத்த சந்திக்கணும் அப்படிங்கிற அப்பாயின்மெண்ட் வாங்கினாங்க. இப்போ மறுபடியும் சந்திக்கிறாங்க. அப்போ என்ன நடக்குது அப்படிங்கிறத பற்றி தான் இந்த ஸ்டோரி. கமாண்ட் ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸ், அதனுடைய சம்மரியை ஒரு 2-3 பாயிண்ட்ல கொடுத்துருக்குறாங்க. அது என்னன்னு சொல்லி பார்க்கலாம். ஓகே. O. Henry's After 20 Years tells the story of Jimmy and Bob, two childhood friends who made a pact to meet after 20 years. Pact அப்படின்னா அக்ரிமெண்ட். அதாவது ஜிம்மி அண்ட் பாப் 2 பேரும் சைல்ட்ஹுட் ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸாக இருக்கிறாங்க. அவங்க ஒரு அப்பாயின்மெண்ட் வாங்கியிருக்கிறாங்க, அக்ரிமெண்ட்டு. என்னது அப்படின்னா 20 வருஷத்துக்கு பின்னாடி என்ன நடக்குது அப்படின்னு சொல்லி பார்க்கறதுக்கு. At the appointed meeting time and location, a policeman walks up and asks Bob what he is doing. Bob explains that he is waiting to meet with an old friend and the officer departs. Later, a man claiming to be Jimmy arrives. However, the man is actually a different policeman sent to arrest Bob, who is a known criminal from Chicago. The original policeman was actually Jimmy, but he didn't have the heart to arrest his old friend. அதாவது இந்த பாடத்துடைய தீமை வந்து 2 பாயிண்ட்ஸ்ல சொல்லியிருக்கிறாங்க. The policeman on the beat moved up the avenue impressively. The impressiveness was habitual and not for show, for spectators were few. The time was barely 10 o'clock at night, but chilly gusts of wind with a taste of rain in them had a well-nigh de-peopled the streets. அதாவது அங்க ஒரு போலீஸ்கார் அந்த தெருவில் ரொம்ப இம்ப்ரெசிவா, ரொம்ப சின்சியரா, ரொம்ப டெடிக்கேட்டடா, வழக்கமான தோரணையோட வந்து கரெக்டா அவருடைய டியூட்டியை ரோந்த வந்து செஞ்சுக்கிட்டு இருக்கிறாரு. அந்த ஒரு நைட்ல அந்த ஒரு 10 மணியை போல, அந்த 10 மணி ஆகல, 10 மணியை போல நடந்து அப்படியே வந்து ரவுண்ட்ஸ் போய்கிட்டு இருக்காரு. அதாவது ரோந்துன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க இல்லைங்களா, அந்த மாதிரி. அந்த நைட் வந்து எப்படின்னா ரொம்ப சில்லியா இருக்கக்கூடிய நைட். டீப் பீப்புள்டு த ஸ்ட்ரீட்ஸ் அப்படின்னா அங்க அதிகமான மக்கள் யாருமே இல்லாத ஒரு தெருவு. புரியுதுங்களா? Trying doors as he went, twirling his club with many intricate and artful movements, turning now and then to cast his watchful eye around the Pacific thoroughfare, the officer, with his stalwart form and slight swagger, made a fine picture of a guardian of the peace. Students, as you know very well, each and every profession has got its own style of walking and its own style of moving and its own style of dealing. In the same way, here the police officer shows his own style of handling the staff, handling the stick that he had in his hand. All right. Being a sincere and dedicated police officer, now and then he puts a watchful eye on the things around him. Alright? On the whole, the impression of the particular police officer is that he did his job in a perfect manner, that he can be called as the guardian of the peace. The vicinity was one that kept early hours, which means the quality of watchful eye, the quality of his movements was as if when we begin the work, we start the work with a very fresh mind. No? In the same way, he was very fresh, he was very alert, he was very active. Now and then, you may see the lights of a cigar store or of an all-night lunch counter, but the majority of the doors belong to business places that have long since been closed. That is, this line, this sentence explains the surrounding of the police where he walks. Alright? When about midway of a certain block, the policeman suddenly slowed his walk. In the doorway of a darkened hardware store, a man leaned with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. As the policeman walked up to him, the man spoke up quickly. My dear students, as the policeman was walking, as he was doing his regular duty, all of a sudden he slowed his walk. That is, he walked very slowly. Near the hardware store, a man was leaning on the wall. The cigar was unlighted one. The policeman went to him, and when the policeman went to him, the other man started talking. Let us see what he was talking. It's alright, officer, he said reassuringly. I'm just waiting for a friend. It's an appointment made 20 years ago. Sounds a little funny to you, doesn't it? Well, I'll explain if you'd like to make certain. It's all straight. About that long ago, there used to be a restaurant where this store stands. Big Joe Brandy's restaurant. Until 5 years ago, said the policeman. It was torn down then. The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond oddly set. My dear students, suspecting any man is a right given to any police. So, suspecting a person is a right to any police officer. Knowing this very well, the one who was waiting there, seeing the police, he became alert and he himself voluntarily came forward saying the reason for his standing there. He explains why he was standing there. He says that he has been waiting there for a friend. He also adds saying that where he was standing, there was a Big Joe Brandy's restaurant earlier. Now the policeman explains what happened to Big Joe Brandy's restaurant. Actually, what had happened was, before 5 years, it was torn down. Torn down meaning it was destroyed. So it was explained by the policeman. By that time, while he was explaining, the man who was waiting is doing something. Let us see what he is doing. The man in the doorway struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed a pale, square-jawed face with keen eyes and a little white scar near his right eyebrow. His scarf pin was a large diamond oddly set. You know, my dear students, as soon as the waiting man struck the match to lit his cigar, the face was very visible. The face was very clear. The face was very expressive. So that has been explained in this paragraph. And his scarf pin was large diamond, differently, oddly set meaning differently set. His keen eyes and pale square-jawed, the shape of the face is explained. And the scar near his right brow also is seen in the light of the cigar. Alright, good. "20 years ago tonight," said the man, "I dined here at Big Joe Brandy's with Jimmy Wells, my best chum and the finest chap in the world. He and I were raised here in New York, just like two brothers together. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. Now, the waiting man reveals what happened 20 years ago in his life. Actually, they dined together at Big Brady's restaurant. Only now the waiting man reveals that his best friend was Jimmy Wells. The name of his friend is revealed. He says he was his best chum. Chum meaning here a very close friend. And the finest chap in the world meaning finest fellow. Chap means fellow in the world. I was 18 and Jimmy was 20. The next morning I was to start for the West to make my fortune. You couldn't have dragged Jimmy out of New York. He thought it was the only place on earth. Well, we agreed that night that we would meet here again exactly 20 years from that date and time, no matter what our conditions might be or from what distance we might have to come. Here, my dear students, their agreement is revealed, one, and secondly, Jimmy's love for New York, to stay in New York, is revealed, and how the other man was indifferent to New York also is revealed. How they departed and why they departed is said in this sentence. We figured that in 20 years each of us ought to have our destiny worked out and our fortunes made, whatever they were going to be. They figured. Figured means thought or guessed. They thought that in 20 years of time they would have achieved their destiny, they would have made their fortune. Whatever the fortune they desired for or whatever the destiny they desired for, that those things would have been achieved in 20 years. Alright? It sounds pretty interesting, said the policeman. rather a long time between meets through, though it seems to me. Haven't you heard from your friend since you left? Now, the police officer explains about their agreement, about the long time, their meeting, all those things, and has a clarification. He asks whether he hadn't heard anything from his friend since he left. Alright? Now, let us see the answer of the waiting man for the clarification of the police. What he says is, well, yes, for a time we corresponded, said the other. But after a year or two, we lost track of each other. You see, the West is a pretty big proposition, and I kept hustling around over it pretty lively. But I know Jimmy will meet me here if he's alive, for he always was the truest, staunchest old chap in the world. He will never forget. I came 1,000 miles to stand in this store tonight, and it's worth if my old partner turns up. Now the waiting man answers that for a time they related. Correspondent means here related. They related each other. But after a year or two, they lost their track of each other. He says that the Western seems very busy. So he became a very busiest man, and so he could not contact his friend. But he assures here that his friend Jimmy will meet him by all means if he were to be alive. And he adds a quality of his friend, namely Jimmy Wells, that he was the truest chap in the world. Alright? He was very true. Both truest and staunchest almost mean together. The truest meaning being true, and staunchest meaning being very loyal. Being very loyal. Good. The waiting man pulled out a handsome watch, the lids of it set with the small diamonds. 3 minutes to 10, he announced. It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted here at the restaurant door. Now the waiting man looks at his watch and looks at the time, and he says that it was another 3 minutes or that to 10, and he explains that it was exactly 10 o'clock when they departed 20 years ago. Alright? Now the police officer asks a doubt. Did pretty well out west, didn't you? Asked the policeman, which means, did you do pretty well in the west? That is the meaning. Did he do pretty well in the west? For which he answers. Let us see what he answers. You bet. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a kind of blodder. Blodder means here a hard worker. He was a kind of blodder, though good fellow as he was. I have had to compete with some of the sharpest wits going to get my pile. A man gets in a groove in New York. It takes the West to put a razor edge on him. My dear students, if you read carefully this paragraph, you would find the comparison between the Western and the American culture. Alright, both are explained by the author indirectly. And the question was, how were you in the West? and how was the West, all those things. That was the question posted by the policeman. And he says, yeah, it was very tough. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a kind blooded though, a good fellow as he was. He was a kind, a good man. I have to compete with some of the sharpest wits going to get my pile, which means though he was a hard worker, now and then I can't stand against I can't stand his intelligence. He was very intelligent, and he compares a man gets in a groove in New York, which means a man gets into a kind of narrow canal in the New York, but it takes the West to put a razor edge on him. Whereas if you go to the West End, a razor will be on him in the narrow canal. So comparatively, New York is better than the West is the answer by the waiting man. The policeman twirled his club and took a step or two. I'll be on my way. Hope your friend comes around all right. Going to call time on him sharp. I should say not, said the other. I'll give him half an hour at least. If Jimmy is alive on earth, he'll be here by that time. So long, officer. Good night, sir, said the policeman, passing on along his beat, trying doors as he went. Now, the police officer takes a leave from the waiting man. He takes a step or two, saying that he will be on his way, that it was time for the friend to come. But the waiting man says, "Oh, yes, it was 10 o'clock, but even then I would give him extra half an hour. If he was alive, he would come by that time." That was the answer, and both of them wish a good night, and the policeman leaves. Alright? There was now a fine, cool drizzle falling, and the wind had risen from its uncertain puffs into a steady blow. The few foot passengers astir in that quarter hurried dismally and silently along with coat collars turned high and pocketed hands. And in the door of the hardware store, the man who had come 1,000 miles to fill an appointment, uncertain almost to absurdity, with a friend of his youth, smoked his cigar and waited. Here, my dear students, the climatical condition in which the waiter waits for his childhood friend is explained. How the people were very, very few, the climate, how it was about to rain, still with the uncertain attitude, almost to the absurdity, the waiter was waiting for his childhood friend, smoking his cigar, and keep on waiting. About 20 minutes he waited, and then a tall man in a long overcoat with collar turned up to his ears hurried across from the opposite side of the street. He went directly to the waiting man. "Is that you, Bob?" he asked doubtfully. "Is that you, Jimmy Wells?" cried the man in the door. Now, my dear students, a man from the opposite side of the waiting man comes comes there and he asks, "Is that you, Bob?" doubtfully. And only now the name of the waiting man is revealed. So the name of the waiting man is Bob. B-O-B. Bob. And Bob replies, "Is that you, Jimmy Wells?" Both Bob and Jimmy Wells now meet together. They exchange their surprise each other. "Bless my heart!" exclaimed the new arrival, grasping both the other's hands with his own. "It's Bob, sure as fate. I was certain I would find you here if you were still in existence. Well, 20 years is a long time. The old restaurant is gone, Bob. I wish it had lasted, so we could have had another dinner there. How has the West treated you, old man?" Now the new arrival, namely, now the new arrival came to identify that it was Bob, his friend. So he grasped his hand and exchanged their wishes, all those things. And finally he asked out how the West had treated him. Alright. Now Jimmy Wells asked Bob how the West treated him. The bully: "It has given me everything I asked it for. You have changed lots, Jimmy. I never thought you were so tall, by 2 or 3 inches." "Oh, I grew a bit after I was 20. Doing well in New York, Jimmy?" Students, bully means a good fellow. Bob answers in a positive manner about the treatment of the West. He says that West had given him everything that he asked for. Alright? The continuation of the conversation says, "You changed a lot," or this fellow says, "He changed a lot," all those things. Alright? "Oh, I grew a bit after I was 20. Doing well in New York, Jimmy?" Bob is asking how he was doing in New York. Bob is asking Jimmy. Let's see how he answers. "Moderately. I have a position in one of the city departments. Come on, Bob. We'll go around to a place I know of and have a good long talk about old times." Now, my dear students, Jimmy Wells answers the question put forth by Bob. He says that he is doing moderately. He explains that he has a position in one of the city departments and requests him and calls him to go around to the places that he knew of. Alright, and he requests he wants to talk a lot, it seems. The two men started up the street arm in arm. The man from the West, his egoism enlarged by success, was beginning to outline the history of his career. The other, submerged in his overcoat, listened with interest. In this paragraph, my dear students, these two men started walking around arm in arm, hand in hand. Both hold their hand each other. They walk in the street, and Bob, who went to the West, explains everything about his success and he talks all about himself. The other one, the so-called Jimmy Wells, he keeps on listening to Bob with a lot of interest. At the corner stood a drugstore, brilliant with electric lights. When they came into this glare, each of them turned simultaneously to gaze upon the other's face. The man from the west stopped suddenly and released his arm. "You are not Jimmy Wells," he snapped. 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change a man's nose from a Roman to a pug. My dear students, here is the climax of the short story. We have come to the climax. The so-called Jimmy Wells is identified that he was not Jimmy Wells. Bob identifies that he was not Jimmy Wells at a corner of a drugstore. In the drugstore, near the drugstore, you have brilliant with electric lights. In the light, the face of Jimmy Wells and Bob is seen. Alright, by seeing the face, Bob identifies clearly that Jimmy Wells was not the Jimmy Wells. Alright. See the words Bob utters when he identifies that the so-called Jimmy Wells was not Jimmy Wells. He says, 20 years is a long time, but not long enough to change a man's nose from a Roman to a pug. Alright. The literal meaning of this sentence is, Bob identifies the nose of the particular person and says that it was not the nose of Jimmy Wells. So by identifying the nose, he says that it was not Jimmy Wells. Alright. My dear students, pug meaning a fighter, a wrestler. Alright. Roman and pug. Pug also has got another meaning, monkey. Alright. So, interpreted meaning for the word man's nose from a Roman to a pug, meaning a Roman's nose will not become the nose of a fighter or a nose of a monkey. Alright. It is a proverb. It is a saying. Yes, it sometimes changes a good man into a bad one, said the tall man. You've been under arrest for 10 minutes, Silky Bob. Chicago thinks you may have dropped over our way and wires us she wants to have a chat with you. Going quietly, are you? That's sensible. Now, before we go on to the station, here is a note I was asked to hand you. You may read it here at the window. It is from Patrolman Wells. The man from the west unfolded the little piece of paper handed to him. His hand was steady when he began to read, but it trembled a little by the time he had finished. The note was rather short. Bob, I was at the appointed place on time. When you struck the match to light your cigar, I saw it was the face of the man wanted in Chicago. Somehow I couldn't do it myself, so I went around and got a plain clothes man to do the job. Jimmy. My dear students, we have not only come to the conclusion of the short story, also to the twist of the short story. Let us see the conclusion and the twist. The conclusion of the short story is the tall man who accompanied Bob was not Jimmy Wells, rather he was a policeman. Bob was a wanted criminal in Chicago, and so he arrested him and made him under his custody is the conclusion of this short story. The police officer who came in the beginning and inquired Bob was Jimmy Wells. So Jimmy Wells became a patrolman in Chicago when he identified at the light of the cigar, he identified that Bob was a wanted criminal. Alright, so he did not want to arrest his own friend Bob, so he sent another a tall man to do the job. Alright. My dear students, at the end of this short story, let me give you the glimpse of our short story. Alright? Good.